On a warm summer day in 1966, a C-130 lifted off from the runway at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, preparing to test the nation's newest and most controversial technology. After a few minutes in the air, the crew activated the equipment. This was the first real test of the technology in the aircraft with a crew on board. People on the ground reported seeing the aircraft begin to fade, but also said that strange objects, which looked like UFOs, appeared around it. As with the Philadelphia experiment, the use of technology designed to use the same energy fields that UFOs might use to move about in time and space may have attracted them to the... Seconds after the plane vanished over Florida, it reappeared over Hampton Bays, Virginia. Not knowing what happened, the crew asked for permission to land at the nearby Naval Air Station in Norfolk. Shocked when they were refused, the confused crew decided to land anyway. Once on the ground, they were surrounded by Marines and Shore Patrol personnel. As they attempted to open the huge back door of the aircraft, the crew members were attacked. One of them was shot and killed and fell out of the aircraft. The others closed the plane up and attempted to take off while still being attacked. They had no way of knowing that their little experiment had moved them through time and space from Eglin Air Force Base in Florida in 1966 to Hampton Bays, Virginia in 1982. Because they were using the wrong frequencies and flying an aircraft unknown to the military in 1982, the base took action against what could have been, for all they knew, terrorists trying to land in the midst of an important government area. Once aloft, they turned on the invisibility technology again, hoping to avoid being shot down. Seconds after turning on the special technology, the C-130 vanished over the naval facility and reappeared over Eglin Air Force Base back in 1966. At that point, it collided with a UFO still in the area and began a fast descent to the ground. Just before crashing, one crew member jumped to safety. His name was Robert Marsh, Jr., and that's how I found out about this story. Because he had all the names of those involved, it was easy to verify. The most interesting thing that came out of the entire incident was how a crew member aboard a flight taking off in 1966 from Eglin Air Force Base in Florida can die on that flight, but have a death certificate from 1982 Virginia. Nikola Tesla was an alternative energy genius. Among his inventions were radio-controlled weapons and AC power generators. It was his understanding of powerful energy fields that made him essential to the Philadelphia experiment. Tesla made an announcement in the early part of the 20th century that he had actually made contact with aliens, but few took it seriously. Maybe they should have. Nikola Tesla had a plan to transmit electricity through the air like radio waves. In test after test, his system worked. The power could even be used by totally electric-powered aircraft. But not everyone was happy with the idea. He built a test tower designed to transmit electricity on the north shore of the eastern end of Long Island. At the same time, he had tunnels built throughout the area for support of his energy system. But after Thomas Edison used his influence to convince authorities that Tesla's system was a danger to the public, federal authorities seized and destroyed his equipment. Most believe that those who heavily invested in electric power as an income source were concerned about Tesla's idea to make it available to everyone for free. Despite their falling out, Tesla and the government were said to have worked together on a number of projects, including the Philadelphia experiment. In 1989, I was able to film and question 3 witnesses who also claimed to have been involved with the original Philadelphia experiment and a follow-up project which apparently took place during the 1970s and 80s. The interview and a presentation by them took place at a private home on Long Island and included just a few specially invited guests. Although some of their claims seemed almost insane, I was intrigued. Knowing what the topic would be beforehand, I brought with me a technical writer who had a good understanding of electronics, energy fields, and electrical engineering. I wanted his professional opinion regarding the technical aspects of their information. To make a long story short, he did not sleep for several days after the event, having been completely stunned by what he had heard. I too was shocked by the information that I received from Al Bielek, Preston Nichols, and Duncan Cameron. But being a paranormal researcher with years of experience, I've learned to always look at the bigger picture, not individual stories or pieces of evidence which are always subject to personal interpretation. In this case, it was obvious these men had been through something. They had far too much knowledge and impressively cohesive stories to be faking it, although I did not necessarily agree with all their conclusions. While Al Bielek and Duncan Cameron had been sailors aboard the Eldridge, Preston Nichols had worked at the Montauk base. All 3 ended up working there on experiments involving time travel and mind control on captured UFO technology and what was developed through the original Philadelphia experiment. It came as no surprise that after I introduced some of the survivors of the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk project to the world through my video set, The Truth About the Philadelphia Experiment, authorities in charge of the Montauk base clamped down hard on uninvited visitors. The clamp got even tighter as I added the subject of what had allegedly happened there to my seminar. That seminar brought the story of the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk project to tens of thousands of people throughout North America via my live seminars and to thousands more on video. The clampdown on already restricted public access to the property was justified by local authorities who claimed that visiting the old base was dangerous. They expressed concern that people might be injured trying to gain access to abandoned buildings or lost in unmapped underground areas. So why leave what they claim is an abandoned base intact in the first place? Why not just go in with bulldozers, explosives, and clear the entire area? Since New York State claims they now own most of the property, why not just clear it and sell the much-desired beachfront land for $1 zillion a square foot to solve all the state budget problems? To put the value of the property into perspective, the sale of all that beachfront land could probably pay for most of the Homeland Security budget for the entire eastern part of the United States for the next 10 years. But it remains unsold, just as the buildings and underground areas remain intact. Why? Camp Hero is the actual designation of what we call the Montauk base that lies at the far eastern end of Long Island on the South Shore. Although it's just south of the historic Montauk Lighthouse, most people have no idea that this facility even exists. Records are sketchy and mostly unavailable on the property, but it's been owned by or under U.S. government influence for almost 200 years. Once considered strategically important, the base was supposedly closed and abandoned in 1966. Once used as an observation area, fort, shore battery installation, and radar facility, the continued use of the property by the federal government was considered unnecessary after another facility took over radar monitoring responsibilities needed for NORAD. At that point, it was turned over to New York State, which has since described it as undeveloped park land. Despite denials from the U.S. government that the base is still a federal facility, it still takes an intervention from a New York State representative or senator to legally visit the property. Once a request has been made by the office of a federal lawmaker on the behalf of a citizen wanting to visit the property, it must be cleared by higher authorities. Who those higher authorities are is unclear. The reason given for this is a small patch of antennas on a tiny hill that is easily visible near the old main entrance to the base. These antennas are used as part of the U.S. Coast Guard communication system and have been for years. Despite the fact that they could have easily been moved elsewhere to a higher and better location at any time, allowing the antennas to remain there gives the federal government a measure of control over the property. That's the enigma of the secrecy that surrounds Montauk. Nothing makes sense about the place and hasn't since the 1960s. I have visited the base on several occasions, spending a considerable amount of time there, and this is no easy task. Men dressed as fishermen regularly walk the perimeter to be sure that no one strolling along the beach or near the lighthouse wanders onto the property. Although they never seem to have any fishing gear or poles, these tall and tough fishermen warn off potential visitors to the base by reminding them that the property is closed to the general public. Each time I visited the base, it was on a major holiday. I knew that there would be few, if any, actual security people on the periphery of the facility. Once inside, I would just have to be extremely careful. On a related note, a four-wheel drive vehicle frantically drove around the base roads after I noticed a surveillance camera staring me in the face at one of the buildings during my first visit. Fortunately, I evaded capture. I visited the Montauk base seeking to verify two incredible stories. According to witnesses interviewed on my Philadelphia experiment video, which also covers the Montauk project thoroughly, the base was used as a continuation for government experiments involving time travel and mind control technology, first discovered during the initial endeavor in the 1940s. The huge radar tower was said to be the instrument that directed waves of mind-altering signals out for miles and into towns that surround the base. Despite the fact that the radar dish wasn't supposed to have been used since the 1960s, I found it in remarkably good condition. The electricity in the tall radar building was on, and the restroom was usable. Although the large motors that moved the dish had been disconnected from it and removed, the dish was allowed to sway in the wind to keep it from collapsing. The technology being used for the alleged mind control signal may have been omnidirectional, not requiring the specific movement of the huge dish to a certain bearing. Large numbers of modern-looking wires ran from tubes coming up from the underground into the building and vanished inside its walls. When turned on during the 1980s, the signal would create havoc in surrounding towns. Some of these peaceful places hadn't had any murders or even their own police forces since the Revolutionary War. Although some of the old base houses lie in ruin, many of the offices looked as though they had been recently used. A few actually had working phones. Although many of the buildings looked to be in a sad state of maintenance from the outside, many were in nearly perfect condition inside. Some had lights on and seemed to have been altered for other uses. The inside of the chapel, for example, contained a modern gymnasium. The old PX, seen here, seemed to have become some sort of a kitchen, with hundreds of metal food trays neatly stacked on racks. Other buildings had new fences erected around them, and very modern security cameras, almost hidden from view, were placed in trees, on rooftops, and along walkways. I went during a chilly time of year, and heat freely flowed through an external system that ran to every building. But the biggest surprise of all waited for me in the underground area. Despite the fact that the base was never occupied by more than 60 or 70 people during any of its incarnations, a trip into the underground area revealed hundreds of wooden racks or bunk beds inside a large maze of what seemed like fenced in and locked areas. It looked almost like a huge base brig or prison, but why so many sleeping areas? The answer might just lie in what the Montauk survivors have claimed. They say that hundreds of people were brought there, against their will, to be part of whatever went on underground. The proof of this seems to be found in the hundreds of sleeping areas and converted PX building where meals for that many people could easily be prepared and delivered to the underground as needed. Another story involving the base was that a large beast, seen on this security camera still, had appeared as a result of underground experiments, gotten loose, and caused external damage above ground. After that, some of the experiments were shut down and the infamous time travel chair removed. I did find some buildings which looked as though they had been attacked and partially destroyed by something big and powerful. Huge holes made it look as if something had punched its way out of the underground tunnels. The remaining tunnels and underground areas were sealed and cemented off where the chair may have been. What took place in the underground area was shocking. One story told to me by Al, Preston, and Duncan was that after Al was placed in the time travel chair, he found himself in the middle of terrible destruction at some future point in New York City. Since much had been done to these people to try and erase what memories they had of the entire project, I wasn't sure if they actually knew when this event would occur. Based on what they said back in 1989, I now believe Al had been transported in time to the year 2001 and the World Trade Center disaster site. The description he gave to me at that time, and that was captured on video, is eerily similar to what Ground Zero looked like after the Trade Center buildings fell. My feelings about this were further confirmed by the fact that he had said he saw the statue of a horse in the midst of the rubble, which didn't make any sense. But then I remembered something. One thing that survived the horrific collapse of the Trade Center buildings was a large sculpture. If a person seeing it was in enough of a disturbed state, it might just look like what Al described, especially given the brainwashing he endured by the government to make him forget the entire incident. It's interesting to note that in 1989, when I asked all three participants in the interview about the incident involving Al and the rubble in New York City, all absolutely refused to comment on it. I felt as though I was walking through a ghost town where the residents had simply vanished or moved underground, but could return at any time to use buildings ready for them. The Montauk survivors believed that the project, in one form or another, was still going on there. While walking on certain parts of the base, I felt a steady thumping under my feet. Given the fact that I had sneakers on and saw no evidence of above-ground construction or a source for the strange vibration, this was more than a little disconcerting. Stooping down to feel the ground with my hands, the thumping was more pronounced. I believe they might have been building new or repairing old underground areas. I visited the Montauk base with neutral thoughts, neither believing nor disbelieving the incredible claims made about the facility by those who say they survived horrifying ordeals there. My concern was finding evidence to support or refute the claims being made. What I found was a base that seemed abandoned, but also very active. The physical condition of what I examined more than supported at least the background fabric of the stories I was told. If you go to the base today, all the old accesses to the underground areas have been tightly sealed. But there is still access to caves along the beach area, once used by bootleggers during Prohibition to smuggle in illegal booze from offshore boats. Many of these caves connect to tunnels built by Nikola Tesla for experiments with electricity many years ago. These tunnels are separate and apart from the others used for access to the shore batteries and the old fort. It would be easy to use these resources to construct a new and even larger underground area for continued experimentation. Why there? Maybe it's some sort of a vortex. I don't know and can't say. But I do know and now believe that at least part of the truth about what the U.S. government knows or has developed as a result of the Philadelphia experiment and captured alien technology is likely buried under what is still described as undeveloped New York State parkland. Is there really any proof that people have traveled through time? At one point, time travel was thought to be impossible, a mere sci-fi fantasy for idle dreamers to speculate on. But the same may be said of the concepts of manned flight, voyages under the sea, and trips to the moon, which were all once considered the stuff of science fiction novels. The best proof of time travel may be the future knowledge known to a person or people who would not have been able to otherwise obtain it. Jules Verne was one of these people. He predicted deep sea exploration and trips to the moon. In fact, in his book From the Earth to the Moon, Verne predicted that 3 astronauts would take off in a multi-stage rocket to travel to the moon. H.G. Wells wrote about a time machine in a day when it would have been hard to imagine such a thing. But he also predicted and described the invention of multi-line phones, the computer, fax machines, and portable communication devices. His description of a military tank long before the first one was ever invented and used in World War I left military experts stunned. No less astonishing is this Egyptian carving from the Temple of Abydos. While some Egyptologists feel it is merely a coincidence or recarving of a previously carved hieroglyph, it seems to indicate the presence of a helicopter, jet, spacecraft, and other futuristic machines. And what would be the odds of all these things being on just one panel together if it was a mistake or recarving? Leonardo da Vinci was a man far ahead of his time. Painter, sculptor, inventor, and scholar. Da Vinci came up with ideas that seems out of sync with the day in which he lived. In a day when manned flight was still a very distant dream, he came up with the idea for a parachute. When travel by sea was still a risky and dangerous venture, Da Vinci invented a diving suit, complete with hoses and a special machine for providing fresh air. While fixed-wing flight was still centuries away, Leonardo already had the idea for a helicopter. Even today, many of Da Vinci's ideas for flying machines boggle the minds of scientists and engineers alike. Perhaps we have to wait a bit longer to understand all the things that he designed. Some may not have been invented yet. In the early 1960s, a painting was discovered in the Palatine Hill area of Rome. It's a place rich with ancient Roman ruins and has been a treasure trove for archaeologists. The painting, dated from ancient times, was a mystery. It seemed to show a very modern building and a rocket ship. Despite all attempts to explain it, the painting remains a mystery. But the scene in the painting is not. It shows a building that exists at the USA spaceport in Florida, along with a Mercury-style rocket and space capsule, complete with the emergency capsule escape jets mounted on top of the space capsule. The question is, how did the unknown artist know about it centuries before America even existed? In August of 2003, Al Bielek, one of the survivors of the Philadelphia experiment and time traveler at Montauk, predicted on a national radio program that there would be a power outage, a major grid outage, somewhere in the United States. It was just a few weeks later that a major power outage throughout the Northeast and parts of the Midwest occurred. Yet people still doubt that our government has been involved in time travel projects. It's hard to imagine the United States government giving up any secrets they know about space travel when they can't even admit to having been visited by extraterrestrial spacecraft. All attempts to get at the answers using the Freedom of Information Act are met by a wall of blacked out papers that are unlikely to hold any real clues to the truth anyway. The more sensitive the document, the more likely it ended up being placed in some officer or government operative's burn bag for ultimate destruction to keep state secrets out of the hands of enemies. We can only hope that if the 20th century will be remembered for being a time when government and military secrets were kept from the people, the 21st century will become best known for being a time during which at least some of the secrets were revealed.